Ah, just a bit of housekeeping. There are some council members who had a scheduling conflict who may or may not be able to participate remotely. We have at least one council member who has a pressing engagement and may need to leave shortly before 7 o'clock. So please don't take offense if anybody
no.
gets up and leaves. And again, you can share any written material with us afterwards, and we'll be happy to distribute that if you want to send it to the clerk.
Absolutely. Great.
All right. So with that, John, the floor is yours.
All right, well, thank you. And first of all, I apologize. I read too much into your text about reciting with some of the folks. I thought that meant everybody, so I do appreciate your willingness and anybody who is tuning in.
Sure.
For your patience. The logistics were mostly my getting here, so I apologize for that. My name is John Pinter, and I'm the Executive Director for the United Religious Community, the URC. The URC is an interfaith organization that encourages interfaith dialogue, works on common causes that different congregations can work on, and we have what's called an advocacy center where right now we are actually, and that's what I was doing just as I got your text, a significant amount of assistance for folks that have been affected by the pandemic with the emergency rental emergency rent assistance program that St. Joseph County is working on. So that's what we're known for. We're a relatively small organization that has been involved in getting various kinds of projects going in greater St. Joseph County. We do cover the whole county, and what I'm here to talk to you about tonight is this is a consultation opportunity for reestablishing refugee resettlement services in St. Joe County. The history of that is that people have been coming to this country and to this area, this community, for many, many years, before even the term refugee had a true legal status to it. After World War II, the United Nations and countries that were involved in that gave the meaning to the word refugee, and that is somebody who has been displaced from his or her homeland or native country due to conflict, religious persecution, a variety of things like that. So a person, to be a refugee, you have to have left your home country, moved to a third place or outside of your country. At that point, you're requesting asylum. This is true in international humanitarian law as well as U.S. law. And then you are visited there if you request asylum. So I want to make sure that the terms are as clearly understood as we can. So somebody flees Iraq, the war in Iraq, and crosses into Jordan. They request asylum there with the idea that eventually they'll be able to move back. And most people, they're able to do that, or they establish a permanent life in that place. And a very small percentage of those folks are able to resettle, about 1.5% to 2%, to another country entirely. And that's what we're speaking about, or what I'm speaking to you today about, that refugee resettlement. And so after the Vietnam era, there became a formal partnership between the federal government and local nonprofits, churches, groups like that, to actually help people in a more formal sort of a way. So there have been ups and downs of people that have resettled formally to this area. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, my church got very involved with helping families that were coming through an organization called Refugee Services of Michiana, I believe. It was a very small office that helped families arrive here. And so our church was involved with a family that moved here from Rwanda, a family from Bosnia and Herzegovina, and a number of other places along the way. I became professionally involved in this when that office closed after the 9/11 era. The number of actual refugees arriving, went down significantly. They couldn't afford to sustain an office, and at the time I was the director of the Red Cross for St. Joe County, and we petitioned to become a refugee resettlement agency and went through similar consultations as this. I remember Mayor Ray was in charge at that point and brought folks over to our office to hear a little bit more about it and provide their input on it. So after 2013-ish, that office went away, and there hasn't been any formal resettling of folks other than if they were joining family members that were already in St. Joe County somewhere. So, and that's been handled remotely, in effect, by Catholic Charities out of Fort Wayne. So we are hoping to reestablish a small program in the area. That would start, so the period of time I'm talking about would be after October 1st of this year, so the new federal fiscal year. The federal government has raised the number of folks that would be allowed to come, and then in the next fiscal year anticipates that going up. We have COVID creates a damper on all of that, but we are petitioning to have a relatively small number, roughly between, we think somewhere between 50 and 120 people in a given year that would resettle to the area. And those are mostly families that would be coming to the area, and we'd help them, particularly in the first 90 days, to get resettled, get housed, get their kids in school, get the adult family members a job as quickly as possible, hopefully get people caught up on English, and their health screenings done, and a lot of that happens in that first 30-day period, and then we're working with the families, hopefully to succeed longer term. So some folks want to ask, where do the folks come from? How are they selected? How are they vetted? What kinds of security risks might people present? There's several aspects to this. So if that family that I mentioned that crosses the border and requests asylum, their story is checked out before they're given asylum by the home country and by the UNHCR, High Commissioner on Refugees. If they are asking to resettle in a country like the U.S. or other parts of the world, that country's equivalent of the Homeland Security does a much deeper background check on those families. And so in our case, the FBI, if a family is petitioning to come to the U.S. While they're still in that stopping ground place, they're vetted by Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, and others to make sure that their story holds up, number one, but also that there's nothing in their past that would seem to create a security risk for their coming. So once they're approved, they have a visa to come. They come as legal folks. They're not citizens, of course, but they don't need, they're not crossing a border illegally. They're subject to being able to move around the country. They're not able to travel back and forth to the homeland, and most wouldn't seek to do that anyhow. But they do come with that full legal status, and then after a year, they are, assuming nothing, that they get their paperwork and done, they are able to get what's called a green card, and then move on the path towards citizenship, should they choose to. I would say the last part of this, in terms of who might come, it's very hard to predict. Honestly, the last group of folks, when I was directly involved with it, we moved from having people from Eastern Europe to more folks from Africa towards the end. A lot of the folks who came were Iraqis who had worked with the U.S. government in Iraq and had to leave the country as a result of that. Who might be that next group of folks that are coming to the U.S.? The biggest groups that are waiting, that have passed that first round, are folks from Eastern Europe, folks from Central Africa, and places like Myanmar, Burma. Unfortunately, the conflict there has picked up again, but the U.S. government will look at, trying to have a group of folks that are coming for which there's a receiving community that might help them out. So we do have a fairly good-sized Iraqi community here in Greater Michiana already. That have succeeded and done really well and are a great resource if Iraqis did come. Right here in Mishawaka, we actually have two of the families from that era that became Habitat for Humanity homeowners with projects right over here, for example, and are great examples of folks who've just immersed, succeeded really well, and become great new Americans for us here. So. Just racing through this, and I apologize for that. So why don't I stop there and see what questions you might have. And please note that for the purposes of the consultations, anything you want to ask, I'll do my best to address it. And if there's questions I can't answer, I'll do my best to get answers for you on that. So.
I have some questions. We had a family move into our neighborhood that came from the central part of Africa, and they've been here, and it was sponsored by one person, and he bought the house for them, and got the family a job, and it's a husband and wife and two children, and so far it's been no problem. They kind of stay by themselves for the last 2 years. We do see them in church. They go to St. Babel's and that. I think you might know who we're talking about and that. I have no problem with something like that. But I am concerned about families coming in and not having jobs, not being able to take care of their home, and living hand to hand with handouts. And I'm not trying to downgrade your organization,
understand.
but I don't think communities need that. We have enough problems right now with the pandemic, with homeless and people out of jobs and things like that. To bring people in and expect the community to absolve and bring those in and care for them and that. So I don't know what provisions you have to not to have that occur.
Well, so my guess would be on the family that you're talking about, that they didn't arrive as refugees. They're probably, there's something called the green card lottery, or
I really don't know. All I know is this one fella, he
sponsors them, correct, yeah.
and he got him a home, and they're just down the street from me in that, and they're a nice family. I mean, they keep up their property in that, and like I say, you very seldom see them other than in church and that, but they're a nice family and that, and I have no problem with it and that, and.
Well, let me describe in general. So we can't predict who's going to come. I can give you from the experiences that I had. When the Red Cross was in charge of it, we usually had about 90 folks come. That's not 90 families. That's, sometimes you get a family of, I remember we had one family of, I think, the parents and then 2 adult children and maybe 7 younger. So it's occasionally you get a bigger family like that. In general, in that 90-day period when they arrive, so they arrive with assistance provided already that we help administer for them. So because when they arrive, they don't have a Social Security number, they do have a visa that will allow them to work. One of the first goal, the first measurement of success is somebody in the house employed within the first 90 days. So that is priority one, job one, if you will, is to help the adult member or members of the family to get a job. We have really good success with that, and this is a great place for that. A lot of the families get their first job working in manufacturing. If you talk to what's now called, I can't remember the new name, but it used to be South Bend Metalworks, for example. It has had a whole group of refugees that have come and learned the ropes there and then made their success from that point forward. So the idea is the assistance ends after 90 days. They've hopefully got enough to get them through that. And we want to get them housed. They're usually not, we're not buying houses for anybody with this. We're trying to get them into affordable rental housing usually. And but there's enough money to at least get them started on that. And then, as I say, hopefully get a job. The second part of it is to really help people integrate and say, this is what it means to be an American. This is how we tend to tend our lawns and how shopping happens and how we get kids to school. There's lots of things we learn from them, too. Many of these cultures are very traditional and have extraordinary respect for parents and elders. At times, I remember, if they found out I was the boss, the deference level, you can see, I don't probably deserve all that, passes along, and it's actually a great exchange of cultures that happens in cases like that. So the families, most of them want to get to know folks, and that's actually one of the measures we have is when they're starting to, my graph would show you like the gap between the ability to make decisions for oneself and the need for others. As time goes on, we want that to narrow so that the family is back in charge of their lives as quickly as possible and understands about house upkeep and getting the kids to school on time and those sorts of things. So we put a lot of our effort in that first 90 days to get them to know how things work here and to connect them with past refugee families like the ones I mentioned here and say, well, how did you get to buying a house in such short order? We want to hook them up with good mentors around that. So.
John, the funding for the first 90 days, does that come from the federal government? Or
Yes.
does that...
It's a mix, actually. There are some contributed parts that we have to raise locally here, but most of it comes, that first 90 days is through the State Department, and it's roughly this. So if you four were a family, each of you would have $1,250 assigned to you that we help administer and work with you. You know, we got to get you your house with food in it, but as you arrive, we'd say, you know, we've looked at some rental places. We want you to be in charge of that. This is how much you can afford and how much this money will pay for now, but when you're going to have to start kicking in as an employee. So if you guys want to be like, you know, what's that, Big Brother or show like that, we could try you out or something, but.
I'd be an only child.
Oh, all right. So maybe that's not a good idea, all right. That's federal money that comes with that. And then there are the grant resources to help them longer term. They will come with what's called refugee medical assistance. It's like insurance that's good for 8 months. So they have to go through a battery of tests, getting vaccinated, making sure that stuff's up to date. And so those things are not local drains, in other words, for it. And actually the county health office is working with the hospitals to try to establish a clinic that will see folks as they arrive, so.
So then, basically, what you're saying is all of these folks then would be legally here?
Yep.
Okay, and none of them are they seeking asylum, or?
No, they got asylum, if you will, wherever their first landing point was. So if you know, it's just the irony of this now is quite rich, but a lot of the, so when the U.S. Invaded Iraq, there were lots of folks who, you know, were brought into service for that, and some of those families had to seek refuge when they realized things were getting difficult for people who were cooperating with the U.S. military, and crossed the border into Syria. So they got asylum in Syria and became refugees there before getting, you know, approved to come to the U.S. or wherever it might be. And then, of course, the war in Syria really heated up, so Syrians were crossing into Iraq, but that asylum is sought at the first landing point, so nobody would arrive here. The only exception to that is Cubans, and the law allows a Cuban national in Cuba to request asylum while in Cuba to come to the U.S. So that's one of the quirks of U.S. law. So
once the individual or the family are approved for entry into the United States, how is it that they find their way to our area? Is it choice on their part? Is it a recommendation or a collaboration between your organization and the federal government? How do they end up in Mishawaka, I guess?
that's a great question. So we would be contracting with one of the there's 9 national NGOs that work with the State Department. Church World Service, U.S. Conference Catholic Bishops, 4 or 5 are faith-based and the rest are non-faith-based. So we would be an affiliate of Church World Service, which actually has their administrative headquarters in Elkhart. So they have a variety of locations, like hopefully St. Joe County would be, but they place folks in Indy, Chicago, and have a number of spots around the country. So when the State Department says, hey, these 4 guys are coming up on the list, about 6 months from now, their testing and vetting and all that will be done. Where can they go? This person has family in Indiana, or his sect is there, or whatever it might be, or they may have no ties whatsoever. So Church World Service, if they said, he's got family in Indiana somewhere, they would look on their list and perhaps come to us and say, we think this family would do well here, and here's why. But if you didn't have any ties to the area, they would simply go based on capacity and cultural competency. In our case, we don't have a particular list of folks that we'd work with, but we know the international communities, small though they may be, that are in greater St. Joe County. And as I said, we do have a good-sized Iraqi group. There's a lot more African diaspora folks in the area than most folks are truly aware of. And if those folks are on the list, then we might jump up on that. Burmese and folks from Myanmar, we probably wouldn't have coming here because there's such a large group in Fort Wayne. And so, they do look at those sorts of things too.
Once an individual or family is identified as being best suited to come to Mishawaka, and as you're helping them during that first 90-day period identify housing, is there a conscious desire to try to have them live in close proximity to other refugees to the point where we would expect that there would be a clustering effect of refugee families who are going to live in close proximity? Or is it a review of the available housing stock and what meets their needs, and there's not going to be, and I cast no value judgment on whichever way it works, but I guess I'll stop there. Is there that clustering effect with regard to where people are living?
Not intentionally, but working with the, housing is a little harder to find right now. Affordable housing is a lot harder to find right now. And so in the quote old days, the first go around that I had with this, if we knew you were coming, we usually get a 6-month, it looks like they're going to be coming then, so you start the prep then, and about a month out, they say, okay, here they have tickets, they're going to arrive on July 10th. And that's when we really kick into gear with locating the housing. In the old days, so to speak, we could get you your Social Security card application going already so that you'd have that. So when you arrive, everybody needs a background or a credit check to get an apartment in their name. We're not allowed to rent the places. That doesn't happen anymore. They actually have to arrive here. So we usually have to find temporary housing for them, but have ideas of places in mind. So much more of the decision-making about where to live has to do with proximity to schools if they've got kids. If they're older folks and that's not a worry, then that's actually a great audience for Mishawaka, because there isn't a need to get kids on a bus. Most folks won't have a car right away. So Pin Oak Apartments had been a good place for that. They were used to working with international families. A lot of the families that started there, and this folks have been around for a while now, have found much higher rent that affordable for them now, housing out towards the Main Street corridor, some of the places there. Some have bought houses. It's really up to them after that period of time. We want to stay connected with folks, but they also, they come with the same freedom to say, buzz off, I got this, leave us alone, sort of a thing. Most don't, but that does happen, so.
So during that first, and correct me if I'm wrong, that 90-day period when you're actively involved, as actively involved as they want you to be perhaps
Right.
in their lives, what happens if, despite the vetting and the other processes that are in place, the individual proves to be less than an exemplary, resident of the community? If there are criminal issues, if there are those failures to upkeep the home that, Mr. Emmons indicated, if there just are tangible signs that this person, regardless of their country of origin, isn't a good fit for where they're living, what if any implications are there of that scenario?
Well, if they commit and are convicted of a criminal act, a felony act, they are subject to being deported.
Right.
So, post-sentence, or whatever, they'd have to serve the time here. So we have not had that happen, and that doesn't happen very often. If they, there are cultural adjustments that have to be made that we'll work with folks on. The one that comes to mind for me is like, in this country, we think of women and men as being equals, and in some traditional societies, the man makes all the decisions on things, and we have to, try to demonstrate and give examples of that. And that's where we use heavily folks that have successfully integrated, made that transition themselves, so that it's not me as, John American trying to say these are the values. We do want to express, these are the values, and this is why you're able to come to a free country like this. But to have people that have made that cultural change, to be as new Americans that can work more closely with families around that. So, I'm trying. Sometimes it really, once we can get people connected, that really makes a big difference, and that's part of the reason URC was intrigued by this. Is we have this network of faith communities that we have to be careful and say don't solve everybody's problem for them, or don't can't be overly involved here and have people compare that church only helped us this much or whatever. We want you to build friendships with folks. So for those kind of guidepost things of this is how we do things here, that families can learn from good mentors. So. And again, it works both ways, so that the cultural diversity that they may bring to, say, St. Bavo's, or to, to their neighborhood or whatever, that we really want to encourage people to explore that and learn that, so that people aren't just, well, that's the African area, and that's the Iraqi area, and that's the native community area, so.
So after the 90 days, is there any type of formal follow-up to try to gauge the effectiveness of the resettlement in a particular community with the folks that you're working with?
Well, yeah, it'd be formal and informal, and probably more heavily on the informal side. It doesn't work if you say, oh, today is day 89, here's the last $12 that were in the account, good luck. We really do want people to stay connected, hopefully to give back, as, to help future arrivals come along. And in particular out that way, there's tends to be a high percentage of immigrants overall, but particularly refugee immigrants, that are entrepreneurial, want to try to start their own business, really want to work, and make success, view success heavily around, I'm able to start my own business or thrive in that way. So there's grants that we can get from not the State Department side, but other aspects of the federal government to help on entrepreneurship skills and those kinds of things, connecting them with mentors and those sorts of things. And there are some real life great examples of that. And there's some examples of people who tried something and it just didn't work, and they went and did something else. One of the folks that I smile as I remember, he's from Kenya. His wife actually was the anchor person, if you will, got her refugee status first, and then was able to petition for the husband and 2 sons to come. And you're not going to meet a more entrepreneurial guy than this, but he wanted to start with mobile pay projects here and getting people to, adopt that in the same way that Africa had, and didn't find success with that. Now he runs a successful trucking company. And, he started as a cab driver and got a job at Kuntz Wagner, and the CEO out there said, I can't hold this guy back. He's got an idea a minute. So, yeah, we can't promise that. We don't know who we're getting. We don't get to pick them. Beyond a certain point, if somebody came with a really high medical concern, we might say that's somebody who'd be served better in a city with a bigger hospital. But for the most part, they tend to really succeed. And so we want to stay involved in that spirit, but also give them their space.
So as you're engaged in these consultations with various segments of the community, what type of concerns do you hear from others with regard to their take on the program and how it fits to their communities?
Well, the required consultations with city governments, with county governments, the health departments, and groups like this, so public officials like yourselves, are mostly the kinds of things you're asking now. It's like, how do we know that you're not inviting, a dangerous person into our community? What's the vetting like? What are those things about? And where are the refugee immigrants in the whole kind of immigrant community? We don't choose to pit one group against another in any way. But this is what we know about the backgrounds that these folks have had. So I'd say beyond that, most of the, thank you.
Yeah.
You have any more questions? Or I'll send around the PowerPoint that I didn't get to show to you all. So
Thank you.
thank you. I think it's mostly that, like, how do we know folks will succeed? How do we know they'll integrate? And, that's on us, but that's on, at some level, all of us to really make that happen. So.
John, first of all, thank you for doing what you're doing. I think it's tremendous work. My family and my wife's family, as I sit here and listen to you and think about our histories, we're a couple of generations away from people. My relatives came from Syria, and hers came from Eastern Europe, with big challenges moving here, without support of a group like yours. Theirs was just support of their community that, as you mentioned, intermingling with people that they know. When people come from your group, I know you help them, and it sounds like the federal government has some funding to help these things, and I think it's great help. I think it's great stuff. It's the American welcome wagon, so to speak. But do they have means for the most part? I mean, are they coming with little or nothing, or is there do most of the people have means that they can help themselves get established here for, for a period of time? I mean, it takes time. So, and there's expenses and such.
Sure. We don't ask that, and there's not a means test to it. And I would say I've seen the gamut from families who literally came from the bush in Liberia with no resources, and they didn't have any they left behind, from what we can tell, to other families who maybe had resources back home and were highly educated and had leadership roles in business and in government wherever they were coming from. So it really does run the gamut, I think. And our job is to try to make sure that whatever assistance we give is given fairly and equally, pretty much equally, to anybody that comes here. And where you see that there's this spirit of folks in and around town that just has a heart for this kind of thing, whatever kind of immigrant folks might be coming in. So when a car breaks down or whatever, they know who to call, how to get help for that. And then other families where they don't require any of that kind of assistance because maybe they did, in fact, have money before they came. So, but there's no means test that is required for them to actually come. So.
The other question I have is, I've heard you talk about people from Africa and Eastern Europe and the Middle East. We hear so much on the news about people from South America. And do you see that? I know that's a different type of immigrant, and from what you're talking about, people coming through in the normal process and whatnot. But are there people coming from South America through this type of process?
Yes, there are refugees from Venezuela. Not a large number right now, and many, that have gotten asylum in Colombia. Colombia also, from past conflict, has had. I remember the only countries in South America, not Central America, but South America, that in that last go around when I had involvement with this were coming from Colombia. But the conflict in Venezuela has forced a lot of people to decide to leave that country. So, and some come as asylum seekers straight to the U.S., and some come through the refugee process. As far as folks, if you think of the southern border, there are people that when they come, they can ask for asylum at the border. But they're not refugees in that sense. So it's a whole different process. They don't have the funding attached. They haven't been vetted. They have to, if you cross the border and ask for asylum, by law you are required to have an asylum hearing. It takes a fairly long time to get to those, and those stories are checked out as well before somebody is granted asylum. If they are granted asylum through that means, there's none of this resettlement. There's still need that they may have. In fact, they often come with very little attached.
There's
to
other
them.
resources and not for those folks, I would.
Yeah, it's a different set
Different
of.
mechanism.
Correct. Yeah, and in a lot of ways they look very similar. The needs are very much the same, but it is an entirely different vetting process. So.
John, I think a lot of those folks, though, I mean, they're requesting asylum, they're getting court dates, but then what's happening is they're skipping off, and they just never go to the court, and they're just kind of lost in the shuffle.
In some cases, that's true.
Yeah.
But in a lot of cases, folks do, in fact, get that court date and watch for that court date. So there's some really good data out there about, what percentage of those folks are actually, making that court date. There's been a good move really over the last few years. So it's not just a new thing, but to try to speed up and get more immigration judges. It is an entirely different process, and I am far from an expert on that. But it does come up in these questions too. Are you talking about that same folks? Not exactly. So.
Well, I guess what I'm hearing, though, is that, these folks they get the assistance for 90 days, but you're still following up, and you're having contact with them if they're having troubles. Your organization is still hopefully trying to help them and work with them so that they are successful.
Yeah, and sometimes folks, I'll give you an example, a sad example. The family I mentioned that came from Rwanda back in, I want to say 2002, I wasn't quite clear on the date for that. So came, did great, Every now and then we'll pop up with an issue or a need or a concern, but mostly they become very good friends of an awful lot of folks in the community. And recently, the parents had a grandchild who they knew was at a high-risk birth and had a heart defect, and the baby only lived 10 days. And so there was a need that they were able to call on this network of folks to help, a little bit with burial costs, but mostly with, really helping the family keep it together. So that kind of, that's not a cost kind of a thing. That's a relationship based kind of
Humanitarian.
issue that we hope happens.
It's a humanitarian issue.
Exactly, yeah. And again, families can say, you know what, we're good. After a period of time, a lot of the Congolese families that moved here, for example, moved to Texas because there's a big population there. And so, we've had families move here because they heard what a great place Michiana is to be and want to join, cousins and family members here. So, but folks are free to move around, but most do wind up staying and making a real go of it here.
What is it that you're looking from us?
This kind of questions. It doesn't require us to, have a vote or whatever, but we really want to get this in front of as many folks along the way, because your constituents might ask, or you might see it in the paper or something like that. We want you to be as informed about it as possible. And we had I was telling Councilmember Hicksonbaugh, we had a meeting maybe 2 weeks ago with folks from the mayor's office, the redevelopment office, and the police chief to give the same kinds of concerns. Everybody has a different sort of take. If you're the police chief, you want to know, okay, how do I need to get involved with this? How can I train my officers? We're happy to do that,
Diversity training of sorts?
Well, in a way.
Of sorts.
Like we do
Maybe cultural training.
Yeah, like who are these folks? And we actually, with a group of classroom kids or whatever, get out 3 or 4 tables, we'll demonstrate, who wants to be the refugee. We do a Mad Lib kind of a thing. It's like pick your conflict and what part of the world it's in, and then walk through that and explain the process of, are you a refugee? Are you an internally displaced person? Are you an asylum seeker? All of those categories, it stinks for most folks. Right now, there's 24 million refugees in the world. It's the highest level of displaced people, and then 80 million people that aren't able to live in their homes. They may be internally displaced due to conflict, primarily conflict. That's the highest number it's ever been. And it's not something that I feel that we can just willingly look the other way on. We're only talking about, maybe 100 folks coming to this area in a given year, and we can easily accommodate that and assimilate folks in that capacity. And it enriches our community.
Exactly right. It's better for us. Diversity is better for us. Better for everyone.
Since we have a
Mr.
couple
Chair.
of council members participating, Mr. Mamiletti, you read my mind. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just want to start off by echoing Councilman Compton's statements of gratitude. I know that my paternal grandparents sure could have used this type of program several years ago when they came to this great country. So thank you for your efforts, your passion, and all that you do. And secondly, I want to apologize if some of this has been covered. My coverage in audio has been sporadic at times. So I'll just fire off. First question is, how many enrollees typically come through your program in the U.S., through the U.S.? Not necessarily this area.
Yeah, through our program? If you mean overall the refugee program in the U.S.? Well, let me throw a couple answers and see if one of this answers your question. So the administration every year sets a cap as to how many the country will accept. That, because of COVID and because of decisions that prior administration made, that number dropped significantly, so that in the year we're in now, it was anticipated to be 15,000. So it'll be a stretch to get to that. Now, the Biden administration has said it will raise that level, but that's between now and September 30th in effect. So So I think this year is an aberration, kind of a year. The number that I believe has been set for the next federal year is 125,000 nationally. And then of those 9 entities, they sort of divided up. Church World Services, which is who we would be going through, is about 10% of that total. So let's say they would be looking to place 10,000 people in the U.S. next fiscal year. They have a number of sites, so they'd be looking at our community, and we're St. Joe County, and we can go a little bit beyond that, but we think of our home as St. Joe County. We're looking at between 60 and 120 individuals in the given year. So does that answer the question?
Thank you.
Right now, we're receiving nobody.
Okay, yes, that did answer that question. And a second question, and potentially the last question that I may have, is you had mentioned that for 90 days, each immigrant gets $1,200 per month for those first 90 days, is that correct?
No, in total. And I think it's $1,250 actually now. So if you come, if you want to join the other folks here as our test family, the $1,250 in effect for your family, we would work with you. We have to make some decisions before you come about, where you're going to stay in the first week or so, and hopefully arrange for one of the apartment buildings or complexes to take folks in, or work out housing, and suggest that strongly to you, but it's still your choice when you arrive here. And then help you get, food in the refrigerator and those kinds of things, and then work with you to make sure that you're using that money effectively and that it hopefully stretches out for the course of the 90 days. Our immediate things are almost right away. My wife is actually very involved with this, and the family typically comes on the last flight of the day, and is really, really tired, and she's working with them on, okay, tomorrow morning we are going to the health department, get you these vaccines. You want to get that part done right away. You want to get their English assessed, and if the kids are school age, you want to get them into school as quickly as possible so you start normalizing. This is what it's going to be like here, and then working with the adult member or members of the family to try to get employment going and test whatever skills they have for that. So the sooner they get employed, the sooner that pressure is off that amount of money, because it's not a whole lot to work with. So.
Sure. So the family gets the $1,250 flat rate, not the host family or whomever.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, it has to be spent on their behalf and directed by the family.
Okay. So each immigrant does get placed with a host family at first?
No, they live independently. What we try to do is, the model's called co-sponsorship, in which we would say, especially through Church World Service, that's the National Council of Churches, if you will, so mostly mainline Protestant traditions that help support that, but we would be trying to connect them with whatever faith communities. As I mentioned, my parish, St. Joe Parish, work closely with families. So we want a faith community or a civic organization to help be a co-sponsor of that. That doesn't mean they take on, we drive them everywhere, and, but in the early days, getting people to and from the doctor's office or those kind of appointments, that's where that co-sponsorship helps. And it's where we're demonstrating that, this is what Americans do with each other. This is our spirit of volunteerism and connection with each other. But you want, you can't see my hands going closer together, but the lower hand is the amount of decision-making that an arriving family can make for themselves, which is not a whole lot. They typically don't know their way around. They may not know the language. It's probably going to be February, somebody coming from a tropical place. And we're trying to, so the volunteer and staff help is high in that, but we really want to get that meeting out in the middle somewhere as quickly as possible so that the family is making, decisions for themselves and investing themselves in, I'm here now, this is where I'm going to be for the rest of my life, and we want to make it good. And we've left behind a really tough situation, and we'll rely on this new community to help us not forget that, but to overcome some of those things and to learn from them. Refugees tend to bring extraordinary resilience skills. When you hear some of the stories of things they did and how they kept their family together and fled a war and a dictator, they're amazing kinds of stories. And that plays out in, resilience here, finding a good job, and taking care of the family for the most part. So there may be, issues that they're going to come up and have to work around, but they tend to be really solid new residents for us. So I'm sorry, I'm
Great,
homilizing.
Great. And did I hear you correctly? You stated that none of your enrollees have committed a felony or deported?
If they arrive and commit a felony, they are subject to being deported. Yes. So that is that's after they arrive. The vetting that takes place should prevent us from getting anybody that has committed a crime back home or is any kind of a threat, based on things that they've done in the past. Or if there's any question, they don't get approved for departure from whatever their home or wherever they're based at that point. So it's a pretty serious vetting process, and that was one of the charts I wanted to show you, was all the different things that folks have to go through. So, but I can send you the links to that. So.
And what, I guess I should have been a little bit more specific. I meant, what if he or she commits a felony once they have arrived and have been vetted and are immersed into the community and then commit a felony?
So they have broken the law here. They have to suffer the consequences of whatever the sentencing is for that. And then, as I say, they are subject. That it's against. I'm not a lawyer, so I forget exactly what the terminology with it is. But they are then subject upon release to being immediately deported. We don't have a lot of experience with. I don't have any experience with that, so I don't know exactly how that happens. But they know that if a family member or whatever commits a felony, that they are subject to being sent back home, or back to wherever the prior home was. So
You said you've never experienced that. So just a rough numbers, how many have you overseen?
So
Zero out of.
Yeah, fair question. So I don't know exactly, but in the period from about 2008, which I started that job in 06, and we became a resettlement agency probably late in 07, and we were resettling folks for 6 years. So, and normally we would get about 90 people per year. So I'm going to guess it was 300 to 400 folks over that period of time. So.
Great. Thank you, and thank you for your time.
My pleasure. Thanks for your questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mamalenti. Mrs. Volker? Well then, we won't wait for Mrs. Volker.
I've actually had we talked about this, as I mentioned.
Kate mentioned that to
Yeah.
us, so I'm glad that you were able to connect. Any other questions or comments for Mr. Pinter? Then again, let me echo Mr. Compton's comments. Thank you for your information and your presentation. We'll look forward to the follow-up information, but I suppose more importantly, thank you for your passion and your commitment to the program that you work within. I've certainly learned a lot. I'm pleased by what I've heard, and I wish you well as you continue down the path toward reestablishment. The thought occurs, since it is our intent to try to post this evening's proceeding on our city Facebook page after the fact. For those who may have additional questions, who want to contact you, could you share your contact information for anybody who was so inclined?
Just state it out loud, you mean?
Please.
Sure, okay, yeah. I'll give you an email address and our agency phone. Just know, right now, we are so swamped with these ERA calls that we typically let it go to voicemail, but leave the message and I'll be glad to get back to you. So our phone number is 574-282-2397. If you hit extension 3, that'll connect direct to my line, and I'll get back as quickly as I can. We're using a Gmail address right now. We're having a website problem. So it's the first letters of our organization's name. U, like United, R, religious, C, community, S, Saint, J, Joseph, C, county. So urcsjc@gmail.com. And that's our general inbox. And if you happen to be listening to this and are in need of the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, that's also a way to reach us, and we can connect you with how to apply for that. So.
Excellent, thank you for that. And then I note that our colleague, Mrs. DeMade, has joined the meeting. So Maggie, did you have any questions or comments that you wanted to share before we wrapped up?
She's on mute. She's on mute.
Yeah, she may have some connectivity issues.
Well, and I know you mentioned that and anybody at this point forward, if you have questions you didn't want to ask, or you think of it later, whatever, reach out to me through that. And Councilman Hicksbaugh has my phone number too, so my cell phone number. I'd prefer not to give that out, but you are welcome to.
Yeah, you've been nice to us, so I won't share that publicly.
Well, internally, it would be just fine. so.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
but thank you.
All right.
All right.
Thanks for your time, and thank you again for your patience. And
No, thank you.
Thank
glad I
you.
looked at my phone
Presentation,
before I got done.
that's-
So.
I learned a lot, as Mr.
Greg?
Dixon both said. Thank you.
Oh, Mrs. DeMade, how are you, Maggie?
Yeah, sorry about that. I just got back home. Is this meeting, was this meeting recorded?
It was. It's my understanding that the IT staff will be posting it on the Facebook page at some point in the near future after we conclude this evening.
Great, thank you. Thank
Plus
you
the
all very much.
PowerPoint
All right,
slides, Greg.
thank you.
Plus the PowerPoint slides.
And Maggie, one other bit of information. John's been good enough to promise us that he's going to send us his PowerPoint presentation, and with the assistance of the city clerk's office, we'll distribute that to all council members as well.
Great, thank you very much.
All right, thank you. All right, and with that, I think we're ready to conclude this evening's proceedings. Thank you, folks.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
All right.